Welcome back to another episode of Real Wealth Podcast. This is your host, Michael Proctor. We are sponsored by Leading Edge Financial Planning, where we help people make wise financial decisions with their money. I have today my friend, Robert Miller.
Howdy.
He is a bigwig when it comes to elder care.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yep, and I can verify by his brochure here. This, in fact, is Robert. The beard is the exact same as the picture, which is amazing.
I try.
You are an LMSW, licensed master social worker.
Correct.
Certified dementia practitioner.
Correct.
Dementia care specialist and Kansas care home operator.
Correct.
Robert owns Care Pitch. It's a consulting firm that helps with consulting on care, private care managed patient advocacy coaching. Now, you were in the business development operations side of Comfort Care Homes.
Correct.
For how many years?
12 years. When I ended there, I was senior vice president of the company.
Right.
And Comfort Care Homes is an example of an industry within the long-term care field where we take care of residents. They live with you. And in particular, Comfort Care is known for its dementia care. So that gave me that experience.
Yeah. So I am so excited to have this conversation with Robert today because he is a friend who he sees people for who they are. He connects emotionally in deep ways. He's very compassionate, very sharp, very smart. You also have a fleet of rental homes that you've renovated.
That's the side gig.
I mean, it's some side gig.
Yeah, it's a hustle, in this day and age when you got to diversify in how you kind of plan for your future. And all of that is a part of me thinking about what I'm going to do when I get older.
Right.
So,
yeah. I think it'll cover you'd be okay. So, but anyways, so Robert is a businessman. He has started this company for consulting. He has experience with Comfort Care Homes at a high level, and also developing his own portfolio along the side. Excuse me. And today he is with Wichita State University.
Correct. So when I left about a year and a half ago from my executive position, the first opportunity was to become a part of the faculty at WSU, specifically the College of Health Professions in the Department of Public Health Sciences and Aging. And that was an exciting personal goal, only because when you've been a case manager or you've done any kind of career expertise for 25 years, you get to a point where you want to kind of share some of that lived experience. Mm-hmm. And this is a great opportunity for me to share how I think case managers, social workers, and other healthcare professionals can work with aging moving forward.
Yeah. And so what's that department again?
So it's the College of Health Professions,
okay,
under WSU,
right,
in the Department of Public Health Sciences and the Department of Aging. So they kind of cover a lot of the health professionals that are going into the field of nursing home administration. You're going to see the PTs, the OTs, the different therapists, the PAs, all running through a lot of the coursework in this department as they're learning to go out and become professionals, bedside professionals in the real world. Yeah. And most of them are going to end up working with some form of aging along the way. So we want to make sure they're well prepared to deal with that demographic.
Yeah. And I'm grateful that you are in the mix of educating professionals about that. Obviously, you can't directly transfer experience and all the neural networks you've built in dealing with patients, clients, families in this area. But that's why I'm really excited to talk to you about this today, because I'm anticipating this podcast will come out just after the holidays. Mm-hmm. So we're recording heading into the holidays at this point.
Yep.
But what is a common experience is there's a huge difference between you've got those who are caretakers, mm-hmm. whether it's a spouse or a family member or a loved one who's watching over somebody that is elderly or mm-hmm. for whatever reason they have some mental decline.
Yep.
Or they're not able to take care of themselves as well, and that's a really long slope to some extent. Yeah. And so the caretaker is with them, but then other family members pop in for the holidays, mm-hmm. and they see the snapshot.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, oh, none of my pants fit anymore, or
Yeah.
how did I get here?
Yeah, what happened to mom?
Yeah. But like there's the difference between being with and the snapshots. So that's why we're talking about this right now, is because I bet a lot of our listeners have gone home and or gone to visit family, and they're getting that snapshot and they're saying, whoa,
Yep.
this might become a problem soon. What's the plan?
It can be alarming, or it can be extremely subtle. You're exactly right. The holidays can be a time in which families who are not living at home or don't see mom and dad on any kind of regular basis pop in for the holidays and suddenly realize, wow, maybe mom and dad aren't thriving or surviving as well as we thought. And parents don't want to be a burden to their children and to their family. And so often they're also very good at masking the challenges. You got to think about, if you've got mom and dad, they've been married 65 years, still living in the home that they've always lived in. The life hasn't changed a whole lot except for the fact that they're struggling with maybe some of the what we call ADLs, activities of daily living, the tasks that allow us to be independent. And then they just kind of, as a team, it's like, mom used to do more of the cooking, but there's something going on, so now dad's going to the grocery store. That's not being revealed to the family on a day-to-day basis, but those can start to be small signs that there are struggles. Doesn't mean they still can't be independent, but it might mean a conversation about, what do we need to do to make sure you're okay, especially if the goal is to stay at home. And families don't often get that cue until they come back for the holidays. They've been gone for a year. Mm-hmm. They've only been talking to mom and dad on the phone, which is charming, and mom and dad tell them what they want to hear. It can be one of those things that can be a marker. So the holidays are important for that reason. We see that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were at Comfort Care Homes, was there an influx of people coming to talk to you after the holidays?
Yes, it was not uncommon. Now, I will tell you, as with any industry, you tend to have what you call seasons. So we might see influxes in January, February, and then lulls at certain parts of the year. But with the massive increase of the baby boomers, which is just a massive, massive generation, I always like to explain to people, I'm a Gen Xer, so baby boomers are 3 times larger than my generation, and the millennials who come after me, the children after me, are even larger than the generation of baby boomers. So I'm trapped. I'm that sandwich generation between 2 massive groups of people. And so I'm taking care of my mom and dad, but I'm also taking care of a lot of kids. And that can be very stressful. And so, the key here to making sure things really work well is to stay as connected to your parents or to the conversation as you possibly can. And understanding that there isn't always a right or wrong answer, but that this massive generation of baby boomers that are coming at us is going to consume a lot of time, energy, and wealth. Mm-hmm. And that's why pre-planning is so important for people, because by the time you start seeing some of the challenges in your mom and dad's life, and you're struggling to take care of all these people, it can be a pretty stressful situation versus just having those conversations earlier.
Yeah. Now, if you were to give this struggle a topic, what would you call it?
Oh boy, people probably call it a lot of things. I look at it as just plain and simple case management, because that's my background. That sounds like a technical term, but everybody can sit down, have a conversation, and put a plan on paper. If it's how do we afford things, your world, or how do we make sure we know what we're doing if there's a need for care in the home. And I look at that as just kind of the conversation of care management or case management. So that's probably the best term I use in a professional sense. To families, they just don't want to have that conversation. Most are pretty scared of it. They're afraid to either offend their parents. Their parents don't want to be a burden. But we're seeing some shifts in that, in the sense that, like, my grandparents' generation was, you don't talk about money, you don't talk about politics. Now, in the baby boomer generation, we do have a generation of aging individuals that have a much different idea about what they want, how they communicate it. They're a little more forthright. And I know that's a generalization. That's not everybody's mom and dad's. But we do have an opportunity with the baby boomer generation to be more planful because they do tend to reveal open and not be quite so private about those conversations.
Yeah. It's got to be weird, though, for someone to be coming to their parent that they used to look up or they look up to.
Sure.
Sorry, don't want to take that away.
Yeah.
But at a point in life, they were their caretaker. The
Right.
parent was the caretaker of the child. Now you have a role reversal. And you may even have a parent who is resistant to being cared for.
Yep.
How does one go about a conversation like that?
So even in my private practice, that's a lot of what I do for families is mediate some of those uncomfortable moments or conversations. We can really normalize a lot of that because if we're clear about the intent is I'm not trying to take control of you, which is often a resistance point for a parent or anyone who's growing older and recognizes they need some assistance, but they can't admit it. They don't want to admit it because they don't want to give up the control. I get that. I don't want to give up personal control and independence in my life. But if we're redefining that, if your goal is to be able to stay at home and dad is having struggles, but he won't talk about it, the ulterior is then we wait till the tragedy. He falls down the stairs, he breaks a hip, and now suddenly the conversation is no longer his. Because these are pretty severe situations as we age. And I would rather have the uncomfortable conversation to sit down and say, look, you want to stay at home? It takes an X number amount of money. Maybe if the kids don't live here, we're going to need someone checking in, someone available to you. What does it look like for you? How can we feel comfortable as family? I think it has to be that negotiation because it can't always just be about the patient, the person, the client. Although we focus on them, the plan includes the family and other team members that are trying to help support this person's independence. And it's a negotiation. None of us in our life get everything we want, even when we feel like we are. So to stay at home might mean, okay, you can stay here, but you're falling, so we're going to do some home modifications. Dad says, I don't want you in my house. You say, well, then understand that may change your ability to stay here. If the goal is to stay at home, then we've got to be able to compromise home modifications, maybe a little bit of help that comes in, maybe, there's all kinds of techniques, but that conversation is uncomfortable. Families aren't always willing. And so having an intermediary like myself or a trusted friend who isn't necessarily as emotionally connected to that can be helpful. I would far rather have that uncomfortable conversation now than when dad has broke his hip and now I'm facing a whole lot of other decisions and difficult choices and things I've got to tell him, like you may not be able to go back home now, even though he wants to. And we never want to forget that patients have a right. Okay, so in this world today, if someone is capable or competent, even though we don't like their choices, they still have a right to make good and bad choices. So,
of course,
we can't override. We can't just roll in and say, hell with you, you're doing this. I mean, some can, some do. But unless they're really compliant and have a buy-in, I mean, dad still has a right to be at home and he still has a right to fall down those stairs. If that's his choice, we just have to make sure he is able to understand the risks and those benefits. My goal, though, is to move to where we don't even get into that situation because we have these conversations early.
Yeah.
And money's a part of it because everybody wants to stay at home. But private duty care or any kind of care that isn't covered under primary insurance or long-term care policies, if you don't have them, it gets expensive. So everyone doesn't think about that. They just go, well, I'll just worry about it when I get there. That's too late. Now you can't even afford the care that would have allowed you to stay at home. You got to talk about all these things earlier.
How helpful have you found it to have a insurance policy for clients or it? And I'm not
sure. I understand.
But how helpful is that?
I think it's helpful in a great number of ways because you would probably you can clarify the term, but you're mitigating the cost out of your own pocket. I mean, insurance is basically, in a way, that's what you're trying to do. If it's a life insurance policy, if it's a long-term disability policy, you're just trying to reduce the risk that you're going to go broke because it's helping pay at least some of that cost, if not all of it. These plans are important, but they're complicated. They take a professional like you to help explain to families how this works. Not all of them seem or fit one person. They, some people want certain things. They want a certain amount. They only want a certain premium. They're willing to take a certain risk, or they already have a nest egg of money that they can allow for that, but they want to make sure it isn't depleted quickly. So I think policies are important. They can certainly make life easier when a family is now stepping in. And it is important that those conversations happen with the family sooner than later, because kids sometimes, many of the families that I work with, the first meetings are simply sorting through, what the hell did mom and dad even have?
Sure.
Did they have advanced directives, which is critical? Do they have policies to help cover the cost? And those conversations are stressful when you've got a hospital telling you you've got 2 days to figure out where mom's going to go because they're now medically stable. Mm-hmm. So again, that Thanksgiving dinner conversation where you take a few minutes to say, let's pull out some of this stuff and review as a family, can be a great tool and something I encourage.
I like that a lot too, because then you're getting to the topic before the topic gets to you.
Exactly. And a friend of mine, one of my gurus, Carolyn Harrison, who is a nurse ethicist and teaches a lot about advanced directive conversations, said that she had an example of a woman who printed off, when we say advanced directive, there's 3 key documents. We're talking a power of attorney for healthcare. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a do not resuscitate if that was applicable, and a living will. And each one of those documents are important. Then there's a whole other slew of documents that an estate planning lawyer or someone can work on if that's the advanced directives, or not advanced directives, but legal documents like a power of attorney for finance, will, trust, things like that. Right. The 3 keys that are really important to what I do is, who is making decisions for you if you can't healthcare-wise? If you are really severely ill, do you want to be resuscitated? Because a lot of people get to a point in their life where like, look, I don't, when the time is time, don't resuscitate me. That's the DNR. And the living will, which gives some latitude for families, but also for physicians to say, if a terminal illness is in play, this person does not want their life prolonged, so we're not going to put them on that vent. We're not going to do other things. And those permissions are really nice. But Carolyn Harrison is someone who said that she had a woman who printed off the forms, took them to Thanksgiving dinner with her family, and said, look, nobody's eating until we've talked about these and completed these forms. And I thought that was really powerful to be able to have the courage not only of a parent to use that as their example, but to insist that if I at 87 am doing it, you at 27 should be doing it as well. I'll ask you a question that we often ask students and all kinds of people. At what age should you have a power of attorney for healthcare?
Hey, I'm doing the interviewing here.
I know, but I'm going to ask.
Okay, fine.
What age would you think is the right age for someone to complete a power of attorney for healthcare? Putting a document in place that says, this person has the right to make decisions on my behalf if I'm incapacitated or incompetent.
Yeah, probably when they turn 18.
Yeah. Oh, you have the perfect answer. So many people think, 55 or 65. No, because at 18, you're no longer the ward of your parent. There are legal cases in which 2 parents got divorced. Kid ends up in a motorcycle accident at the age of 20. The parents can't agree on what they want for this child who is now critical or maybe having a lot of challenges.
I actually had a client that happened at the age of about 25. He was single, so no spouse.
Yep.
Parents, and the parents wound up handling it, but there's still that period of time where things are unclear legally.
Yes.
Who can make decisions.
Yes. And that's a stressful thing. That's why I say at any point having those conversations, especially with our aging parents, so that we know, some people make their kids joint powers of attorney for healthcare. That is not often my advice, because I think that makes a stress point to let 2 or 3 kids all have equal authority. I think what you do is you have to be able to look at the person that you know you trust will do what you want. And so maybe it's the son is the power of attorney for healthcare, the daughter is the power of attorney for finance, and that's how you create balance. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that's the way you have to do it, but I think you have to think about that, have conversations, and make decisions about that before the critical moments happen. Mm-hmm. And we make that mistake at all points of life, but in particular, we make those mistakes as people are aging, and we don't want to have those conversations with our parents. You have to.
Absolutely. I love your insight because you see so many situations, and you are a very emotionally connected person and insightful and all those great things. There was something you hit on that I just felt like got to the heart of the issue. You said, if you go talk to your parents, there can be a presumption of control, like a control struggle of like, I'm still me. I want to maintain control of my life. I'm not ready to give that up. I especially don't know why you want to take control of it. And there can be all kinds of motives applied to what the conversation is. But let's go a little bit deeper on the emotional side of that conversation for maybe both parties.
Okay. First, I always like to tell people this is a relationship like any other relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't have a close relationship with your parent, this conversation is not going to go easy.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have through that relationship an establishment of trust or whatever, then you kind of have to ask yourself, am I the right person then? I'm a great example. I'm a product of divorce. My biological father married 4 more times, had 7 children. I mean, it's just convoluted. My mother married when I was 5 years old, and she lived with that man until he passed away. And he was my stepfather. He kind of raised me. He was the stability factor of my life. But even still, throughout all of that, I knew with my biological father, because of the estrangement, because of the challenges that our relationship had, I should never be that decision maker. I was not the person to be having that conversation with him.
Yeah.
Not because I didn't care about a human being, but we didn't have the trusted relationship that's necessary. And if I have any ulterior motives because of pain, struggle, and trauma in my life, mm-hmm. I have to be honest about that because I might not be providing the best attention or care to him. So I always explain to people, first you got to know, am I the right person? And that's based on the relationship you have with the person you say you're going to care for. We have a lot of, as you mentioned, ulterior motives. I mean, sometimes if I was that youngest child that felt always neglected, now I'm an overachiever is what I tend to see when it comes to helping mom and dad in their later years because I'm trying to regain maybe something I didn't get when I was a kid. And if those agendas are happening, you got to be honest about that. Because again, for them to feel that they trust you and that you would do what they would want, which may not always be what you would want for them. Like, I don't want to be resuscitated. And the kid's like, but I'm going to make sure you're always alive because I can't lose you. Those are important things to self-recognize. So you got to assess the relationship, know you're the right person. Most people, what I see because of the work I've done, if that was working in ERs, traumas, in other places in hospital settings, or even in the years that I worked specifically in home health and hospice, everybody avoided the conversation. Everybody might have sat around the dinner table thinking they all liked each other. Mm-hmm. And then dad has a heart attack and mom's struggling to figure out what to do. And we're now just finding out that maybe there isn't a power of attorney or there isn't certain things in place and maybe dad won't be able to come home or he's going to go to skilled nursing and you can imagine if the relationship of trust isn't already established and I'm just the kid that comes home and then goes back to California, it's going to make that conversation harder.
Yeah.
So, I keep hitting that. So what I tell people is, if you're really going to be a committed caregiver, if that's the role you want to play in the relationship of your parents, you've got to make sure that you're building an adult relationship with your parents. It's going to build trust and allow you to have these conversations. And that's a piece that a lot of people don't think about. One, because it takes extra time. Mm-hmm. But we tend to have this like, I'm going to roll in when the tragedy happens and I'm going to save the day. That's great. But if you haven't had any conversations and the situation's serious and you don't have legal power to make decisions, or we didn't realize mom and dad didn't have a will, or they didn't have any plans, and suddenly it's like, we got to talk Medicaid, not private duty care in the home because they can't afford it. Boy, that adds a lot of stress then instead of having those conversations up front. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's so important to ask yourself in the relationship, am I the right person to even be having this conversation because of my relationship to this person? And if that's the case, start building the relationship as an adult with your parent.
Right.
So that the trust is there, they understand you, you understand them, that you can have that conversation.
Yeah, and back to your point of, these are relationships.
Yes.
Regardless, it's a relationship. So either you're making deposits into it or taking out or just ignoring it. Maybe it's languishing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's the tough part is, and there's so many, there's so many pieces that fly under the radar if you haven't really even taken the time to do work with a therapist or do internal work or
right.
Work on yourself, that there are motivators and drivers that are very powerful that are so part of you and part of that relationship, and especially when it's your own parents and you grew up and whatever happened.
Yep.
And if you haven't really unpacked it at a deep level, it's still impacting you.
Yep.
And it's so even for somebody listening to this, it maybe, because I remember before I've done some work, I would have answered that question really differently. Of like, well, yeah, of course.
Right. He's my dad. Of course I'm going to be there.
I'm the financial planner in the family and, whatever. But there's a piece of me that's like, well, I don't know if that's my role.
It's a good point.
And the reason I say that is because it's like, hey, there may be somebody else in the family that has a closer relationship with him, that maybe they are the best one to do it, even though face value, I may have some professional standing in dealing with it, but that doesn't mean that conversation all of a sudden is going to be what it should be.
Right. I see so many people when they're filling out paperwork, especially around powers of attorney and who's going to be there for mom or dad when they need that help. And one of the key criteria is proximity. We tend to say, oh, well, Susie's closest. But the point is Susie the right person? Because in this day and age, we know that we can actually execute and communicate and do a lot even when we're remote. So if the closest relationship is the youngest daughter and she lives in Denver, and mom and dad still live in Wichita, and she's the one that really has always proven that she'll advocate for mom and dad's needs at the level they want, maybe she's best to be the power of attorney for healthcare, knowing she's going to carry documents and have accessibility. She can make the phone call, and she's an 8-hour drive or a 2-hour flight from Wichita, depending on those needs. And then someone else might be more prone to the financial support or the on-site support, running the errands, making sure things are checking in, things like that. Just because someone has a healthcare background in your family does not make them the best person for your healthcare power of attorney. Again, the question for me, first and foremost, is do you trust that this person would do what you would want, not what they would want for you, if you now are in a situation where you're on a vent, where you're not able to make decisions for yourself, and this is not what you would have wanted? Can they be the one to make difficult choices? And just because you have a nurse or a doctor in your family may or may not mean that they're the right person. They might. That education and life experience can be very valuable in those roles. They have coping skills to deal with it. But first start with what's the relationship, and are they the right person?
And that's some of what you do here at Care Pitch.
Yes. I find that a lot of people want to dive right into the documents and the planning because they're kind of in that. My clients tend to be in the yellow zone, not the red zone. So they've gotten news. They've learned that dad has dementia. They've learned something's happened, but they are still living life at the level they were when they got the news. And they want to start talking about the what now scenarios. But I've learned that a good 50% of the front end of that is we got to get through some emotional and psychological things And that's what's good about being a social worker, is that before we start just pulling out documents to sign, sometimes we've got to start asking the question, who is the right person and why are you making this choice? And that doesn't often there's not often time for that when you're now in the red zone. I'm in the hospital, I don't have a power of attorney, and I've got a chaplain or a social worker coming to me saying, who's going to be the power of attorney? If dad can even sign that form at that point. Again, I think there is no perfect scenario. You know, for type A personalities or OCD personalities, which I can be, I love to think that I've got everything signed, dotted, properly organized, scanned on a jump drive in my pocket and ready to help at a moment's notice, right? That is not always going to be the case. I'm not trying to set up a false sense of perfection in this. But the key of having conversations sooner than later is something we typically have control of. And how we establish those trusting relationships. And there's another part that I talk to people is really, when I took care of my last living grandmother, one whom I really wasn't supposed to be the person. Okay. This would have been my biological father's mother. I had been really estranged from that part of my life for a long time for a number of reasons. She wandered back into Wichita, and I was aware of that. But one night, working a shift at the hospital, I used to work at St. Joe Hospital, I get a call from the SICU that a woman was looking for me. And I come down and I find my grandmother sitting in the waiting room because her husband had gone into a cardiac episode and they had rushed him into the SICU. At this point, I hadn't seen her in years. And that sounds sad, but that's just sometimes what happens in families. I was not her power of attorney, but she was looking at me going, help. And so I quickly started to work through that. 8 years later, we had the most beautiful reconnected relationship. But it took time for us when she decided that she was going to change her directives to make me her power of attorney and her trustee. To know that I was going to do what was in her best interest, maybe than what others might have. And, that was never a perfect plan, right? But it did take a crisis in that moment for her to not only look at my grandfather's life, but her life moving forward and who she would trust to really be there for her. And I think that takes a little bit of time. Yeah. You got to do that. You can do it now.
So maybe a question for listeners to think about. I don't actually throw a lot of questions out there now that I think about it.
I love it.
But the question to think about is, who would you trust to make those kind of directive decisions for you? If you can't make a decision about your medical care, if you can't make a decision about, what happens if you're medicated. So something that can happen is you get put on morphine, you go in the hospital, and you think the flying monkeys are coming to get you. Mm-hmm. You're not in a place to make medical decisions.
Correct. Yeah, and those are moments we can't plan. I mean, we don't know when we're going to slip on the ice and hit our head and have a hematoma. We don't know when we're going to have a car accident and suddenly you wake up 3 days later. So that's why we say at 18, because a parent can make those choices for a kid, but up to 18, having at least a power of attorney for healthcare is a valuable tool because it empowers people. And that document can change. It changes for me. When I was 37, I had certain people that I had on that list. As you get older, those people relocate. They maybe aren't as close to you. Things change in the dynamic of relationships. All of these things should never sit in a safe and not be reviewed. And so I think it's important for people to remember that the initial conversations that lead to the planning are important, but these things have to be reviewed to make sure they still fit. Next year, John, my husband, and I will pull out our trust documents and our advance directives. It's been about 5 years, and we have some changes that we want to make, and that's perfectly legitimate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at least in the state of Kansas, by default, the spouse is the decision maker.
Not necessarily. The state of Kansas does not have laws of succession. So unless someone can correct me, that's how it's always been told to me. So unlike other states that might have a law of succession which says in the absence of any legal document that says this person has authorities to make X number of decisions for you, They may say in those states, then it goes to your spouse. If you don't have a spouse, it might go to your oldest sibling, and. The state of Kansas does not have those documents, does not have that law. And so what starts to happen is, in the absence of you planning and saying who you want, other people start making those choices. So now I'm admitted in the ER. There's no power of attorney. If I have one child and she shows up, probably not going to get questioned. My spouse probably won't get questioned. But if I have 6 children and they're not agreeing on what should be done, and there's no legal document, it starts to get complicated for a physician or an institution to be able to say, because now it becomes a liability issue.
Right.
And, it was interesting to me. I saw that they're actually bringing forward a new documentary on Terry Schiavo. This was a young gal that was in this very same circumstance, and it turned into a major legal battle between lots of family members to just figure out. I don't remember the exact location, but I think you're right. So why would you want to set yourself and your family up for a circumstance like that when all you have to do is put a name on a piece of paper you trust and sign the document?
Right. And that you actually can go. Okay. Now, I've had Tim O'Sullivan on here a few times.
Yes.
He's tremendous in the estate planning space. So go back, check out a couple of those episodes. We talk about estate planning, but also Medicaid, long-term care planning. Yeah. There's some technical things that can be done aside from just having an insurance policy or having a bunch of money set aside or a bunch of cash flow.
Asset protection.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that go into long-term care planning from the financial side of things. Preparation is really important, really key. So not to, on the legal and the financial side.
Yep.
Super important. I don't know, I'm still blabbering about it. Terry Schiavo was coming up in my mind earlier. I'm like, that is really the poster child of be prepared.
Yes.
And have your affairs in order, because then you might be on a ventilator for, a decade because your family can't
make the decision. And for all we would know, maybe that wasn't your choice. I'm not here to suggest that everybody in the world doesn't want things. There are a lot of people who do want things and would want their family to sustain them. But if you don't put it in writing in a way that a person who's been given that power can make that decision, then everybody's putting their arms up. You got doctors involved now. You got lawyers involved now. You got a whole lot of other people you never imagined helping make decisions about your life. And it is so important to indicate what I would want as much as what I would not want in those circumstances. People think, well, God, this sounds such like a morbid conversation to have my parents at this point. But the reality is I do think kids that step up and start the conversation, their parents are more willing today than we might be surprised. They're just as afraid to bring it up as you are.
Yeah, I don't love talking about it.
Sure. But you have children.
I do have children.
And you have young children. And so for you, that conversation becomes, if something happened to me and my wife, because we always travel together, what would happen to them? And if you just never put anything on paper, what do you think is going to happen to them? State's going to get involved. That's not what you want. But if you said, I want them to go to, and I want this amount of money set aside for. So this conversation is not just for the aging, but we tend to use it as an example because it is a part of life at that point where we really do need to know, what would you want? What would you not want? Where do I find things? And how do I be helpful to you if you're ill or unable to make decisions for yourself?
Absolutely. The other thing you might ask, if you maybe are resistant to thinking through this, is do you want your family members, we'll say, regrets of the past playing into how they make a medical decision for you? Do you want, because there's all kinds of stuff that has or hasn't happened in every family.
Sure.
Every single family. Everyone's
Absolutely.
got it. And so when you have, I would speculate in the Schiavo case that there were family members who maybe they were bringing guilt into the situation. Maybe they were bringing whatever it was, but it was about them into that decision. And they couldn't agree, but that was what was in the driver's seat.
people's view of religion, people's view of politics, people's view of how they were brought up. Mm-hmm. And in no way am I suggesting, even in the examples we've given, that means that there's a good party and a bad party.
Sure.
It means that you have people that are coming at these sensitive issues with a point of view based on how they were brought up and what they believe and all those things and their relationship to you. Everybody is, in most cases, trying to do what's best for you. What you have to decide, though, is who is the person or who are those individuals that I want to give power to, that I know will do what I want, even if it goes against what they believe. And that's a hard thing to do, because I see a lot of parents that, again, they start with the oldest child and say, well, they're the oldest, so I'm going to do this. But the question is, and I know this from my own experience with my husband, who is the youngest of the family, he is very close to his father, who is 92. Boy, he's brilliant. He's doing so good. But John really wants to be a part of this part of his father's life. He wants to feel engaged in the decision-making, the information gathering, and the support of his father. So don't disregard that it is always the oldest of anything or whatever. There are people that want to contribute and can do a great job at this. But it all comes, again, from family conversations.
Yeah. Okay. A couple topics I want to make sure we cover are, what should we be paying attention to in our aging population, family, et cetera? What do we look for as far as a telltale sign of, hey, this is at a point where if they don't have a plan, this is going to be critical before too long. What should we look for?
Well, you brought up as we started the episode that a lot of times kids come home for the holidays and they start seeing changes in mom and dad. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not eating as well. So in the example of one of my grandfathers, after his wife passed, my closest maternal grandmother, of breast cancer, we thought it was grief, but it wasn't. He had most likely frontal temporal. They diagnosed him with Parkinson's. That can get often sometimes confused, but with dementia. And what we didn't realize is that because grandma did all the cooking, cleaning, she was kind of the domestic goddess, raised the family, ran the house. In her absence, even in her sickness, she was able to tell my grandfather, whose mind was beginning to diminish, Al, here's the list, go to the store and get this. She's no longer in the picture, so we started realizing all he was buying was cookies. He didn't even know how to boil an egg, because that was, never his skill set within their relationship and their partnership. But also, as his rational thinking and his mind was diminishing, we were starting to see that. But you don't see that if you don't show up, right? Mm-hmm. And so paying attention to changes in common routines. We all evolve. Suddenly we get into square dancing when we never thought grapple liked that or whatever. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, but you'll see subtle differences in their ability to thrive that would call into question, okay, maybe we've got some changes happening. Hopefully you still already have had conversations about what those individuals need before these moments, but these are important triggers to look for. Cognitive indifferences, or the ability for them to even manage money. Fiduciary abuse is the number one form of abuse. So, as a mandated reporter, I have to report, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. But fiduciary abuse is the number one abuse that we see, because it is so hard to even notice that it's happening. Yeah. And so when I work with people like Denise down at the Better Business Bureau, and they do a lot of education around this, it's so critical to ask, hey, do you need some help? Or maybe once a quarter, can we sit down and look at this together just so that I know you're okay? Now, they don't always like these conversations of you diving into their money, but I would rather find a way in a trusting relationship to start doing some of that than to find out that the money that would have paid for really good care for him has been given away because he started writing checks to some crazy place. And that happens more than we think. So watching for some of those oddities and change in those things. Health-related changes too. Their physical ability, they're not walking as well, stuff like that. Maybe they're starting to withdraw They don't call as much. They used to meet friends for lunch. They don't do that anymore. They're not a part of the bridge club. These are all things that are good signs for us to say, hey, maybe we need to sit down and say, is something going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, though, parents can be highly resistant to wanting to admit that something's wrong. And so we have to still be sensitive to how we approach those conversations. And I think there's a way, if they know that you're doing it out of care and not out of trying to take control,
mm-hmm.
that parents will be willing to be a little more vulnerable.
Well, I'm going back to earlier we talked about the approach doesn't start at the event.
It often does, which is the sad part for a professional like myself. It shouldn't.
Yep.
Maybe that's what I'm saying. If there's anything that when I walk away from this mic today that I hope your audience hears is, wow, you know, maybe my parents are just now breaching 60 and they're not quite retired, but we haven't talked about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I really want to be there for them. If it inspires people to simply think about the relationship they have with the person they love and how they want to be helpful to them, and it leads to these conversations, then we've won today, because I see far too many times people avoid it. They don't want to talk about it. They're afraid of it. But the end result on the other side of a trauma, tragedy, accident, whatever, I can guarantee you are not going to enjoy any better.
No. One of the biggest themes I've observed in having now over 40 of these podcasts and talking about what does it look like to live the best life possible at the time we have left is that every single time relationship comes up.
Yeah.
Okay. It's realizing the income, the assets, the toys, all that's very limited in its actual value.
Sure.
But relationships are the things that shine once people get to a sense of their own mortality and they realize, oh, I've had a long life here. What's really important? And so I feel like there's a lot of synergy between coming to terms with that, of how do we invest in our relationships with ourselves, our friends, our family, mm-hmm. especially our family, and how do we have conversations, have a relationship at a level where that conversation is very actually natural, or maybe it's not totally natural, but it's easier to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, I see more and more these days where some of the legal decision makers that a person decides on isn't even a family member, if they have family or not. Right. And so we see the value of our chosen family in a lot of this process as well. Best friends, people that we grew up with, people that know our parents, people that know us. Relationship is so incredibly key, because it can be a transformative process in building the trust or establishing the trust that allows us to have difficult conversations. There's also Atul Gawande is a physician that did a lot of work. He did a book called Being Mortal, which is phenomenal. Talks about the realities of our mortality and the importance of these types of conversations. The book was led, I think PBS or CBS, somebody did, and you can Google it, did a 1 hour series on being mortal, which is really exciting. And I would encourage people to see it, because it leads to a tool that he helped develop through an institution he developed called a Serious Illness Conversation Guide. This is, again, where a lot of us as professionals end up at, is we don't get to you until you walk in the front door of a clinic or a hospital or an ER. And there are still ways for us to, of course, create those conversations about knowing what goals are and how to really meet a person's idea of the comfort and quality of life. But these tools can equally be valuable for family members when they get an initial diagnosis of stage 3 cancer. We have a treatment plan. We're looking to do stuff. We're all freaked out. We're very emotional. But we should also be able to have a conversation about, Mom, what do you want, and when is enough enough? And have we put documents in place to make sure that if for some reason during the process of your treatment that you need some help and someone can step in and make decisions on your behalf, what do you want those decisions to be? these are really valuable tools. I would encourage anybody listening to Google Being Mortal, the book, as well as the documentary, and just take a look at it, because it's focused on how we're trying to better teach clinicians, physicians in particular, how to do better at having these conversations. They're human too, and they're not always the best at it either. But we really want to be having these conversations before we're getting into the ER.
Yeah, and we can put some links in that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll be glad to give them to you.
As well as to Care Pitch, Finding Solutions Through Acts of Caring.
Yep. You know, it's interesting because I'm currently pursuing what you call an LSCSW in the state of Kansas. That's a clinical license to allow me to do psychotherapy. But a lot of what I'm currently doing with Care Pitch is just merely case management. It's life coaching, if you want to look at it, and how to maneuver the healthcare system before we get in it. When someone goes to the ER or a hospital, they get a social worker through that network, but that person is usually pretty focused on the trauma, what's happening, and what the next step is. My goal is to try and help people, one, alleviate the possibility of some of those injuries or needs, but really think about this before it happens, if it's just for the client or for the client and their family. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take, you don't have to hire a person like me. I mean, you can have these conversations, but there are people out there that are trained that can assist you in mediating these conversations and then putting things in place.
To cover maybe a few basic topics along the lines here, I want to talk a little bit about what are the stages of cognitive decline.
Okay.
What does care, how much does care cost?
Okay.
And how would one go about maybe shopping options for care? Absolutely.
So I'm assuming, because some of your questions you've asked have been more about the cognitive changes, but we got to remember, I mean, people deal with cancers, they deal with ALS, they deal with neurological problems. There's a lot of conditions, but what we see, probably the greatest fear point is what happens if I end up with Alzheimer's. And certainly alz.org is one of the best. It's our national, international organization that focuses on resources and support for people dealing with or helping care for someone with dementias. I also like to make sure, and people always hear this because dementia is kind of a broad term. It's kind of like the word cancer. And then Alzheimer's is like breast cancer. It's a specific type of dementia. So some people will say, Mom has dementia. And that may be true, but what we are better at today than we have been before is with testing or working with your primary care or neuropsychologist, neurologist, getting closer to what type of dementia, because there are now more and more factors that show how we might be able to symptom manage how it presents. So, for example, Alzheimer's is the number one leading diagnosis, about 85%, I believe, of the total diagnoses. But we're seeing frontal lobe, we're seeing or frontal temporal dementias, we're seeing, Parkinson's with dementias, all kinds of other types. So you really want to empower yourself to know if you're in this realm. But do you want to focus on more of the dementia type things, or tell me, because that conversation goes a long way.
Okay. Well, I don't know that we have time today for that.
Sure.
I do want to thank you, though, for all of your work with the Alzheimer's Association.
Absolutely.
Because you organized a conference here as a caregivers conference. That was for statewide?
So, yeah, I did it for about 8 years. I'm a co-founder with Jenny Shipman of what was initially the conference on dementia. And by the time I finished 8 years in, it still happens. They've got other people. I stepped back because I think you got to have sometimes fresh perspectives. But at 8 years, we were bringing in about 850 participants, both professionals and everyday families, coming together to learn about different types of dementias. We had international speakers and researchers and all kinds of stuff. So check it out by going to Alzheimer's. So I think it's the Alzheimer's, which is South Central Kansas chapter, which is the one here in Wichita. They can get you information, and I have a link to their website.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Because there's so many caregivers that are looking for education and resources, and you brought in the Rhinestone Cowboys.
Yeah,
wife?
no, it was, we had Glenn Campbell's wife the year that Glenn Campbell passed. And it was a powerful experience when you hear someone at that level who can speak to you about what the experience was of taking care of someone with dementia, especially a figure like that, And the vendor support, which you've been a part, there's plenty of people to not only learn but ask questions. We have great resources in this area between our Alzheimer's Association, education, Central Plains Area Agency on Aging, which we often call CP3AA. We can put that link in your segment here too. Is great when you think about store housing information about all kinds of things. So anything we talked about today, if someone wants to talk about advanced directives, they've got people to guide them. If they want to talk about Medicaid benefits and applications, they can do that. If they want to talk about resources the county help pay for, like respite care, CP3AA is a great organization for helping with that. And I would highly recommend people, reach out and learn more about what they can offer in the community.
Right. What is the range of care cost?
It's extensive. Statistics today still indicate that what we call informal or unpaid caregivers, family caregivers, if in the realm of dementia, provide about 18 billion hours of care that's not paid. It's valued at over $340 billion. So, families are still the primary front line for care, at least for people with dementias and that kind of thing. We can add all the other disease factors in and see how complex that is. And so if I'm at home and I'm providing a certain element of care, but I'm only using a little bit of private duty, those costs can be hundreds of dollars a week.
Sure.
For most people, probably pretty manageable. But if you get to 24-hour care and you want it in the home, you're going to find that this can be costly at an average of $28 to about $32 an hour. That's pretty much our industry standard in this area. Usually by that point, people are deciding, am I going to move into assisted living where I have a certain level of independence? They're going to provide med management, assistance with bathing, dressing, and 3 meals a day. So it takes off some of those ADLs, but I still have to be responsible for myself. Those costs can run anywhere from $2,000 up to however elegant you want it to be. So you could find assisted livings that run $8,000 a month. Mm-hmm. Some of that, again, becomes about amenities. What can you pay? What do you want? You start getting into long-term care, more what we think of as nursing home care, where 24-hour care is really necessary, takes a lot of people for lifting, bathing, dressing, or even dementia care. These costs begin to skyrocket even more. It can go between $10,000 to $12,000 even in this market. When I first started in dementia care 12 years ago, we were averaging around $6,000. So you can see in a short amount of time, it's almost doubled, if not tripled in some regards in the dementia care arena. Right.
And what's the trajectory of that cost looking like? How much are we growing each year?
It's pretty clear. I mean, COVID hyper reacted everything. If you look at the trends, not only in the costs of food, groceries, and gas, but just general living expenses, but also in the costs of living and other expenses. People in the arena of long-term care have the same problems. Food costs went up, gas costs went up, utility costs went up. And so, an average of 3 to 5% on a cost of living increase is not atypical. Mm-hmm. When you move into a place, they might give you a 3% increase annually. But a lot of these places had to do much larger increases in the last couple of years just to be able to keep the doors open. And that's understandable no matter how expensive we believe it is. Dementia care being that kind of most expensive in the cost level, because when you think about at that point, the level of not only really well-trained staff to deal with a complicated situation beyond just frail elderly, right, but also the fact that usually we're trying to get those in smaller environments. So you're not amortizing that cost over 60 people. We only maybe have 12 or 30 people, and so it costs more simply for that reason as well.
And if we bring it down to real practical terms, how much would somebody have to pay you to 24/7 be responsible for somebody who is completely unpredictable, not even sure where they're at?
Right.
I mean, that's what we're paying for, is because that's the alternative, is either we're the caretaker,
right,
with a burden that will literally kill us.
It can. I'm always careful with that statistic.
Okay, fine.
No.
Could.
The Alzheimer's Association has a statistic that indicates, and I don't have the exact number, I want to say it's close to 60% of people, caregivers, report a heightened level of stress. They don't specifically tell you that you're going to die from it, but it is not atypical for us to see that the well-abled, bodied, healthy, or supposedly healthy caregiver can succumb before the person they're caring for in the realm of dementia, meaning they become ill, they need care, or they potentially even pass away from the experience of that intensity of care if they're providing that on their own, especially at home with very little support.
Yeah, and if you're 85, 90, 95.
And you're taking care of your husband.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You're not up to that, physically speaking.
Yeah. This is still a generation that believes in sickness and in health, which I don't disagree with, but it's very hard for them, one, to let go of that control and that sense of responsibility. I think as we, not to suggest that the baby boomers don't believe in sickness and in health, but I think we're going to see they saw what their parents went through as the escalating rate of dementia is increasing. Baby boomers will hopefully be a little more kind to the decision-making, that we can't just talk about what the patient needs with dementia. We have to include the primary caregiver as part of the plan. Because if they succumb, we lose the most valuable thing we have.
Yeah.
And then we see that happen. It's also an area where, like with my grandmother that had breast cancer and battled it for 10 years, it was a little easier to care for her at home because I could say, Grandma, stay in your chair and I'll go to the store and get you what you need, and I could help her, right? With my grandfather, you can't do that because you don't know if he goes out the front door and you never see him again. Yeah. So there's a 24-hour stress level. He's up at night, so I'm not getting any sleep. But when he falls asleep, I'm still alert and oriented or alert and wake because I'm trying to get it caught up with laundry, housekeeping, and other chores because finally he settled down. It's an exhausting journey when we get into dementias.
What else would be important for us to talk about today from your perspective, being the consultant and the expert in the room in this topic of just in the family system? What does everybody need to be aware of, or what is the most key piece of advice you can give when we're dealing with this topic?
You're not perfect.
That's great.
You're not, if anybody knows as much as I know, when I meet a client, I'm worried about them because that means they've been through it a lot. And in most cases, when I'm in the room, it's the first time, or maybe they did it for mom and now they're dealing with dad. Because I wouldn't want you to have to go through what I see people go through. Even in the best of planning and even the best circumstances, it's a very emotional experience when you're saying goodbye to someone you love. But it is a reality of our life, right? It's guaranteed, death and taxes. So I would say the best way to empower yourself is just at that point, make sure you know when to ask for help. Make sure you're having the conversation sooner than later. And know that there are quality resources that you can tap into. You don't have to know it all. And then to try can exhaust you as well. The last thing I will add, and then depending on how you want to wrap up, is also be very careful. We're in a state in which we have so much access to information. Google this and all that stuff. Not all of that stuff is helpful, even if it's correct. So don't overwhelm yourself. But the reality is there is a difference between knowledge and expertise, okay? There are a lot of people that get a certification, read the books, and want to call themselves experts in any of these spaces we've talked about today. But if they've not actually practiced the knowledge, they're not an expert. So just make sure when you're dealing with people that you want to bring into the fold, that you want to trust, you ask them, what is your experience with this situation? Have you actually worked with clients with dementia? Like, have you been the one at the bedside, or did you just get a certification? You're very smart about it. I don't want to belittle knowledge, but today it can create some confusion for families when people are giving advice who have never even been in the room or in a care home. And I would just make sure you know the people you're bringing into your team are people that, if they say they're an expert, they really have practiced the knowledge that they say they have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, because I know as I play the reels back to when I first became a certified financial planner, very head knowledge based. I did my best with the tools that I had, but there is a seasoning that happens as time goes on of incorporating experience, incorporating mistakes you made, stuff you missed,
absolutely,
things that weren't even on your radar,
absolutely,
that you were blind to, because that's literally your blind spot until there's something that brings it out of the blind spot.
right.
And so that's a really good word on expertise versus knowledge.
Yep. I just see it more and more. People have learned there's a lot of money in this area of aging and industry. I'm not saying that people are corrupt and that they don't care.
You just have motivations.
But they have motivations. I have to make a living. I'm not going to say that. And I won't even profess, even within the things we talked about today, that I probably am an expert at, because I've done it a million times, that I sometimes don't feel the expert. So I have people I go to. I have people I trust, ethics, lawyers, nurses, because I have to stay in tune with the fact that what I know today changes. It changes. So just make sure you're bringing people onto your team, your physician, your accountant, your CPA, your family. All that's a part of the team that you should start collecting now in those conversations, so that everybody knows, oh, yeah, I know the lawyer. I'll give him a call. I'll help you out, Mom. Versus the lawyer suddenly getting a call from a son he's never met before. And then he's like, well, I need to vet
What's
you.
going on here?
Who are you? And the same with doctors. With my last living grandmother, we went to the meetings together before the crap hit the fan, because we wanted those people to know. And there were times that the bank called me and said, something doesn't seem right. Is your grandma okay? Well, that wouldn't have happened if they didn't already know me. So that's a part of that relationship building when you're building your team.
Yeah. Hey, good job on the bank's part to lean into the relationship side instead of so worry about covering their tail of everything to the T.
Yep.
So.
Yep. A family member was trying to get money from my grandmother, and the bank, the lady at the front desk called me at work and said, your grandmother's not acting right, and she's here with someone we've never seen before, and they're asking for this amount of money. And I said, that's okay. I'm on my way. Can you hold that? And I had authorities to be able to freeze the account. But although that made my grandmother mad in the moment because she was embarrassed, the reality was my intent was correct. And because of that relationship at the bank, we saved her from losing tens of thousands of dollars that day.
Oh, my. Well, good job for having that relationship and having been proactive of having the authority to freeze the account.
Yeah, it's the best example of why talking in advance before you hit the fan, because she was mad, but by the time I got to her, I could explain to her, look, do you see what's going on here? And I'm not saying you can't spend this money, but this seems a little out of the normal. And, your money pays for your care. When that's gone, what do we do? She had to really adjust that because she was being manipulated. And that's, again, that happens to all of us. So we have to be patient, kind, and supportive. So,
yeah. So there's two questions I want to get out.
Okay.
One is, in the course of your career, your business development, personal development, et cetera, to where you're at today, what's maybe one really formative lesson you've learned and taken away that was a major growth point for you, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah, I can fail, and that's okay.
Yeah.
My generation, failure was weakness. And we live in a time now when you look at people like Brene Brown, who's doing studies on vulnerability and talking with younger generations that are in college now, getting MBAs and all kinds of stuff. And they're like, yeah, they teach us to fail and fail fast, because go through, you're going to have a million ideas and you don't want to waste your time. Get to the next one. Try, and again. And those aren't things I've always been comfortable. I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur, but yet I own 4 companies now. So getting comfortable with the idea that it's okay to fail. Fail not only in sometimes the work I do, but also in the businesses and the belief that I can make a difference in the community. Because if you don't fail, then that means you didn't try. So that's been important to me.
That's wonderful. And as you're talking about that, I'm thinking through, I'm listening to a book by Jocko Williams. It's talking about the dichotomy of leadership, I think is what the book is called.
Okay.
Very interesting, recommended to me by a friend. But you're talking about failure.
Yeah.
Train to fail almost, but keep going. That's not the end of the road.
No.
But I do think about like SEAL training and just how much they break down that, but it's okay. You're not going to get this, but you're going to keep trying. Right. Is the deal. And so that's really cool. And when you said it, you meant that authentically and genuinely. Yes. You didn't, you didn't pull any punches on that. So
I don't like it. I'm not comfortable with it. I wasn't raised with it. It's still in the back of my mind. It's like, ooh, to show anyone that I failed or to admit to it or discuss it or think that I stubbed my toe on it is a sign of weakness. But the reality is that kind of level of vulnerability under Brené Brown's theory is the most powerful leaders we have today, the most authentic leaders we have today have one thing in common, and that's that they have a moment of vulnerability and a willingness to accept the failures that led them to where they are today. Mm-hmm. That's far more important in deciding who's going to be a true leader than any other factor. That's really powerful to me. So I want to fail. I want to do it, and then I want to try again because I care about what I'm doing.
One of my favorite movies. Have you ever seen Meet the Robinsons?
Yes. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Keep moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great.
Yep.
The other one is, what does it look like for you to live the best life possible with the time you have left?
So for me, and this leads back to a question about wealth. Wealth to me isn't a next number of dollars. It is, you have to help me figure that out. But it is the ability to do the things I want with the organizations I believe in and the people that I love. That is success. That is being rich. That's wealth to me. Mm-hmm. And so, a life well lived to me at this point in my life, as I'm now 53, is you really do start letting go of the BS. You stop listening so much to, or hopefully you stop listening to what other people think about you. And you start moving forward with a kind of development that gives you the confidence to live that kind of life. That's what I want. And if it takes $5 million to do that, great. I'm not trying to be J-Lo. I don't need 12 houses and a jet plane. I'm not saying I wouldn't mind a jet plane. But,
I thought you were going to say you wouldn't. But never mind.
But it's not an aspiration. So I think that's the goal. The goal is to be able to wake up every day and do those three things. Do what I want with my time. Give it to the causes that I believe in, and spend time with the people that I love.
Yeah. That sounds like a very full life.
Thanks. Well, you've been a part of that, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
And I'm privileged to.
Yeah.
I love hanging out with you.
Good. Well, maybe we can do this again.
Maybe we can go deeper on some of the more technical things.
Yeah, whatever you want to do.
Whatever. Maybe
if people give you questions or there's something you want to come back to, I'm glad to.
Yeah. And so as you're listening to this, whether you're on YouTube or one of the channels, if you drop questions in as follow-up, we get a roll of questions going and ask them next time with Robert.
Sure.
And check out Care Pitch. If nothing else, click on the link from the deal and give his website some hits.
Yeah.
Not that he needs our help.
No. Okay. No, you know how it is. This day and age, clicks matter.
Absolutely. Well, they do.
Yeah.
They really do.
Click like, click share. Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening to our episode. If any of this has been helpful to you, do us a favor, do your friends a favor, share it to people in your world you care about, because inevitably we've all, if you're here, you have parents or you had parents. And so you know what it's like to some extent. Share it. Okay. These are important topics on how we can invest in our relationships, how we can have impact that's meaningful, lasting, and help us all get along better and better quality of life. So thank you so much, Robert.
You bet.
Please share it, follow us, like it, link it, whatever. It'll be great. So this has been your host again, Mike Proctor, with Robert Miller here on Real Wealth Podcast, talking about real wealth, and sponsored by Leading Edge Financial Planning, helping people make wise financial decisions and living the best life possible at the time we have left.
I love it.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Robert.
You bet.